Imagine finding out that the person you've shared your entire life with, your twin sister, wasn't who you thought she was. I'm not talking about a simple sibling argument or a little family gossip. I'm talking about a betrayal so deep, so clever, that I could hardly believe it was happening. For years, my twin sister had been pretending to be me, living my life, making my decisions, stealing my identity without anyone suspecting a thing. And when the truth finally came out, it wasn't just my trust that was shattered. It was the foundation of our family. Have you ever imagined what it would feel like to live such a big lie? And what to do when you finally discover that everything you believed in was turned upside down? In this video, I'm going to tell you everything about the biggest betrayal I've ever experienced. A story of deception, sibling rivalry, and the fight to reclaim who I really am. Now, if you think this could never happen to you, stick around to see how the story turned out to be more real than I ever imagined. And before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe to follow this emotional journey. I want to know in the comments, could you ever forgive a betrayal like this? Growing up, I always thought my twin sister and I had this unbreakable bond. It felt like we were two halves of the same whole, you know? We were inseparable, like two peas in a pod, sharing everything from our favorite foods to our deepest secrets. She was my best friend, my confidant, the one person I knew I could always count on, until everything started to unravel, and I realized that what I thought was a perfect life was actually a carefully crafted lie. I remember it like it was yesterday. The shared childhood memories, the inside jokes that no one else could understand, and the way we'd finish each other's sentences. Our bond seemed unshakable. The trust one had in her was absolute. There was no question in my mind that we would always have each other's backs. We were the perfect pair, almost like we lived in a world of our own, built on a foundation of loyalty, love, and shared experiences. But as time passed, I started to notice small things that didn't quite add up. At first, they were easy to ignore, little quirks in behavior, moments that seemed a bit off, but in the back of my mind, a nagging feeling began to grow. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, something wasn't as perfect as it seemed. The cracks started to show, but I couldn't have known how deep they went or how far the deception would stretch. The truth was still hidden from me, wrapped up in layers of family drama and the ever-present tension of sibling rivalry. In hindsight, I now see that it was the beginning of the most shocking betrayal I could have ever imagined. My twin sister was pretending to be me to live my life. Yeah, you heard that right. My twin sister, someone I trusted more than anyone, was living a secret life, and I had no idea. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind to the signs? At the time, though, I never could have imagined what was really going on. It was the calm before the storm, and I had no idea how everything was about to change. The shock of it all would shake me to my core, and in the coming days, my world would be turned upside down. But before we get to that moment, before I discovered the truth and everything came crashing down, let me take you back to when everything was still normal, to when I thought my twin sister and I were living the perfect life. Little did I know, the trust issues and emotional manipulation that had been quietly simmering under the surface were only the beginning. The life I thought I had with my twin sister was nothing more than a lie. And when the truth came to light, it would open up a Pandora's box of deception, emotional fallout, and family chaos that would change everything I thought I knew about my sister, my family, and myself. Now, the question remains, how could this happen? How could someone so close to you, someone who knew you better than anyone, betray you like this? The answers didn't come easy, and the journey to uncover the hidden truth wasn't one I was prepared for. But once I started to see the signs, there was no turning back. Stay with me, because this story is about to get a lot darker and a lot more complicated than I ever could have imagined. It's crazy how easy it is to miss the first signs when you're so wrapped up in the comfort of what you think is your reality. For the longest time, I couldn't even begin to imagine that anything could be wrong. After all, my twin sister and I had been through everything together, from our first school days to all the late-night talks, dreams, and schemes. We were partners in crime, and I thought nothing could tear us apart. But in hindsight, the first signs were there, creeping up like whispers in the dark, barely noticeable but enough to make me question the stability of everything I thought was solid. It started with small, seemingly insignificant changes. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid or imagining things. After all, I was so used to our closeness, and any tiny change felt out of place. I began to notice that my sister started acting differently around me. There were moments when she seemed distant, almost like she was holding back from me. It wasn't a huge shift, but there were tiny cracks in the way she looked at me or responded to simple questions. She would give vague answers, her usual enthusiasm replaced by a cool indifference. And when I would bring up something we used to do together, she'd act like she didn't know what I was talking about. For instance, one day we were talking about a childhood memory, something we had both experienced, and I noticed she didn't remember it the same way I did. It wasn't a big deal at the time. I brushed it off, thinking it was just one of those things. After all, memories can fade, right? But the more it happened, the stranger it seemed. She started acting like she didn't share the same experiences or emotions I did, almost as if she was becoming a different person. It was like she was pulling away from our shared life, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. At the time, I chalked it up to growing up, to us evolving into different people. But deep down, I felt this subtle shift, like she was slowly slipping out of the world we had always known together. Even the little things started feeling off. Our usual hangouts, which used to be filled with laughter and inside jokes, began to feel forced. She'd cancel plans at the last minute, and when I would ask her why, her excuses never seemed to make sense. Sometimes, she'd tell me she had to work or that she was busy with friends, but I started to wonder why she seemed to have more going on in her life than I was aware of. The more she distanced herself, the more I felt this strange void growing between us. It wasn't just physical distance, it was emotional, too. I kept telling myself that it was nothing. Maybe she was going through something, maybe she was just busy. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and I couldn't ignore the growing sense of confusion and doubt that kept bubbling up inside me. I began to question myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining things? It wasn't just the actions, but the way she started speaking to me. Her tone had changed, almost like she was talking to a stranger, not the twin sister she had shared everything with. Little comments slipped out that didn't quite make sense, as though she were hiding something. There was one instance that stands out more than the others. We had been talking about our plans for the future, something we had always done together. But when I brought up the idea of us working toward the same goals, she became strangely evasive. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, brushing it off like it wasn't a big deal. But it hit me in that moment. She didn't just not know what I meant. It was as though she had no idea who I was anymore. And that was the moment I realized something had changed. I tried to brush it off, but every little inconsistency piled up, building a mountain of doubt in my mind. I started questioning our whole relationship. Was I overthinking everything? Was I just being paranoid? But no, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something was wrong. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, the nagging feeling that there was something more going on only grew stronger. Looking back now, I see it all clearly. The subtle avoidance, the hidden truth she was carrying with her, the life she was living that I had no idea about. All the signs were there, but I couldn't see at the time. All I knew was that my twin sister, the person who had always been my closest ally, seemed like a stranger. I thought I could fix it, thought it was just a phase. But the truth was far more complicated and much more heartbreaking than I ever could have imagined. And that's when the reality of the situation began to sink in. There was something she wasn't telling me, something huge that I couldn't understand. But I wasn't prepared for the shocking discovery that would soon change everything. I had no idea that the twin sister betrayal I was about to uncover would turn my world upside down. But before I even knew what was happening, the lies were already set in motion, and I was about to find out just how deep they went. It's like a punch in the gut. The moment you realize you've been living in a lie, and everything you thought was real turns out to be a facade. The moment I discovered the truth about my twin sister, about her pretending to be me, was something I'll never forget. It was like everything I'd ever known was shattered in an instant, and I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was not just a slap in the face. It was a total gut-wrenching, heart-crushing revelation that I couldn't have been prepared for, even if I had seen the signs. It all happened so suddenly. One day, I was looking through some old messages on my phone, just going through the usual routine. And then it happened, something that caught my eye. It was a message from someone I didn't recognize, but it was addressed to me. "Hey, how was the meeting today?" the text said. I paused, confused. I didn't have a meeting that day. I hadn't even mentioned it to anyone. And the weird part, the message wasn't meant for me. It was meant for my sister. It was a message I should have never seen, and yet there it was, a clue in plain sight, leading me down a path I wasn't ready for. But that wasn't the moment that everything clicked. No! That moment came later. It wasn't just a message. It was a sudden realization that my sister had been living my life. She had been stepping into my shoes, taking my place without anyone noticing. How? I didn't know yet, but it was slowly starting to make sense. It was a mind-bending discovery that made me feel like I was losing control over everything I had known. My first thought was, no, this can't be real. But deep down, I felt a sense of dread beginning to build up, one that I couldn't ignore. It was only after this that I started piecing together all the oddities. The missed appointments, the strange interactions with people I knew, the way my sister had been acting so off for weeks. Suddenly, everything that had been bothering me about her made perfect sense. And then came the moment when I knew I had to confront her. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. The confrontation was brutal. I decided to sit down with her one afternoon. There was no way around it. I needed answers, and I needed them now. My heart was racing as I sat across from her, and I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of betrayal that had been building up inside me. I was scared, angry, hurt. Every emotion imaginable was crashing over me all at once. I asked her, point blank, "What is going on? Why are you pretending to be me?" The look on her face when I asked that question, it was a mixture of surprise and guilt. She froze for a moment, and I swear, time stopped. It was like she didn't know how to respond. And in that silence, I knew I was right. Something was wrong. Something was huge, and I wasn't imagining it. And then she said it, the words that cut deep, the words that left me breathless. "I didn't mean for you to find out. I was just trying to live my own life." My heart dropped as she said it. The truth was out, and it was worse than I ever imagined. She admitted it. She had been pretending to be me. The life I thought was mine, the people I thought I was connected with, she had been living all of it. She had been stepping into my world, taking my place in relationships, in work, in friendships. It felt like I was hearing a story that didn't belong to me, a life that was being lived by someone who wasn't even supposed to be there. It was surreal, but the proof was undeniable. I couldn't process it at first. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. I was shaking, my head spinning. How could she have done this to me? How could she have stolen my identity, my life, and left me in the dark about it all this time? It wasn't just a little white lie. It was identity theft, pure and simple. The betrayal felt like a knife in my chest, twisting as it sank deeper. I didn't know how to even begin to comprehend the situation. The most devastating part was that, while I was struggling to understand everything, she seemed oddly calm, as if she had rehearsed this moment. She apologized, but it didn't feel like a real apology. It felt like she was trying to cover up something much bigger. I had so many questions, so many emotions I didn't know how to express, and all she could say was, "I just wanted to be someone else. I wanted to be you." It wasn't just the theft of my identity. It was the emotional manipulation that came with it. The way she convinced everyone around us that she was the real me. How she spun a web of lies so intricate, so well-planned, that even our family couldn't tell the difference. She had successfully switched lives with me. And as I sat there, feeling like my world was falling apart, I realized the true extent of her deception. It wasn't just about a few lies. It was about my whole life, everything I had built, everything I thought was mine. That moment was the point of no return. The shocking discovery was just the beginning, and the journey ahead would be one filled with emotional heartbreak, trust issues, and painful revelations. But I didn't know then just how deep the lies ran, or how long it would take to uncover the truth. What I did know was that I had to confront it. There was no turning back now. And as the reality of the betrayal started to sink in, I realized just how much I had lost in that moment. It wasn't just a life swap. It was the beginning of a whole new nightmare I hadn't been prepared for. It's one thing to have someone borrow your clothes or even take your phone by mistake. But what happens when someone takes your entire life, every piece of who you are, and wears it as if it belongs to them? That's exactly what happened to me when I found out that my twin sister had stolen my identity. And I don't just mean my name or my social media profiles. No, she had been living my life, my relationships, my career, my friendships. Everything that I thought was uniquely mine, she had assumed as her own. To some, it might sound like an extreme scenario, like something straight out of a thriller movie. But for me, it was real, and it was painful. At first, it was hard to even process the magnitude of what had happened. I started piecing things together, one small detail at a time, and the more I uncovered, the more disturbing it became. For example, it wasn't just the little things that were off. It wasn't like she was occasionally using my phone or chatting with my friends under the radar. No, my sister had taken over major aspects of my life. She was interacting with my boss as if she was me. She was showing up at my family events, pretending to be me, while I was left in the dark, not even knowing the details of my own life anymore. It was as if I was looking at someone else's life through a window, powerless to take it back. One of the most devastating revelations came when I found out that she had been dating my boyfriend. Yes, you heard that right. While I was oblivious to what was happening, my twin sister was out there pretending to be me, even in my most intimate relationships. She didn't just steal my identity on paper. She stole my most personal connections, too. The betrayal stung so badly because I felt like my entire sense of self had been hijacked. And yet, in the middle of all this, there I was, unseen, unheard, watching someone else live my life while I stood on the sidelines. But it didn't stop there. She didn't just replace me in romantic relationships. She was also taking credit for the work I'd done. She was getting praise at work for things I had accomplished, attending meetings, and even taking credit for my ideas. Imagine working day in and day out, building a career, only to realize that someone else was walking into your office, taking your seat, and pretending to be the person who had put in all the effort. The worst part was that she did it all without anyone batting an eye. How did she pull it off? How did she manage to trick everyone around us into thinking she was me? I'll tell you, manipulation, charm, and a whole lot of lying. She was good at it. Really good. She played the part of the perfect twin so well that no one suspected a thing. At times, it felt like I was trapped in someone else's life. I'd find myself sitting at my own desk, looking at my own emails, but they didn't feel like mine anymore. I felt like I was living in the shadow of my sister's actions. I would hear about things I had supposedly done, things I had never done, and I would be left questioning if I had lost my grip on reality. It was like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from, with my identity hanging in the balance. But the real kicker came when I realized that she had been living my life without any real consequences. People around me, friends, family, co-workers, they all accepted her as me. I was invisible in my own life, and she was thriving, wearing my identity like a costume. It was as if she had found the perfect disguise, and no one could tell the difference. The longer I lived with this realization, the deeper the identity crisis became. How could I reclaim my life when it had already been so thoroughly claimed by someone else? It wasn't just a matter of catching up with stolen moments. It was a complete overhaul of my sense of self. I had to confront the bitter truth. My sister wasn't just pretending to be me for a few hours or even days. She had been living my life, fully immersed in it, for who knows how long. She had mastered the art of impersonation, so well that it took me months to even notice something was wrong. My personal identity was no longer just a reflection of who I was. It had become a fractured mess, a puzzle I had no idea how to put back together. And as if that wasn't enough, the emotional toll was unbearable. Each revelation felt like a new wave crashing over me. How could I trust anyone now? If she could steal my identity so easily, what else could she take? What was left for me to call my own? The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. And yet, in the midst of all of this, I had to find a way to move forward. My life had been hijacked, but I wasn't going to let it stay that way forever. The question was, how could I start over when everything I thought I knew was built on lies? It's a question I'm still trying to answer, but what I do know is this. Reclaiming my life wouldn't be easy, and as the days went by, I could feel the weight of the stolen identity slowly eating away at me, like a silent thief lurking just out of sight. But in the quiet of my thoughts, I knew something had to change. Something had to give, because at some point you have to take back what's yours, even if it feels like you're fighting against the world. And so, the real work began, of uncovering the truth, confronting the deception, and finding a way to piece together the wreckage of a life that had been stolen from me. It wasn't just about reclaiming my identity. It was about rediscovering who I was, beneath the layers of lies and manipulation. But how would I do it? Well, that was the next chapter of this journey. The beginning of a long, painful process of emotional recovery and, hopefully, healing. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you were being pulled in every direction, where things didn't seem to add up, but you couldn't put your finger on why, then you can probably understand the emotional manipulation I went through. When I first discovered my twin sister had been living my life, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt like I was caught in a web of lies, with her at the center, controlling every move, every conversation, every relationship around me. What hurt the most was realizing that not only had she deceived me, but my entire family had been a part of it. They had been manipulated too. At first, it was hard to believe. I mean, how could my family be complicit in something like this? They were supposed to be the people I could trust the most, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that they had all been subtly manipulated by her actions. My twin sister wasn't just pretending to be me. She was controlling everyone's perception of me, planting seeds of doubt, and using their love for me to her advantage. Take my parents, for example. They always said they were proud of me. They always said how great I was doing in my career and how much they admired my strength. But what they didn't know was that my sister was in the background, pretending to be me, taking credit for my successes, and fueling their pride with false accomplishments. They couldn't see through her act. To them, she was the perfect daughter, doing everything I had done and more, without any of the flaws they thought I had. They had no idea that they were celebrating a lie. It wasn't just my parents, though. My friends were in on it too. They thought they were talking to me, sharing their deepest secrets and thoughts, when in reality, they were talking to my sister. They couldn't tell the difference. My twin had become so good at imitating me, at mimicking my mannerisms and speech patterns, that no one suspected anything was wrong. She had, in a sense, become a chameleon. She was living my life, and everyone around us was none the wiser. The worst part was realizing how much she had twisted my relationships, how she had used me as a pawn to gain the trust of others. She knew exactly what strings to pull, what buttons to press to make people believe she was a better twin. And the thing is, I didn't even know it was happening until it was too late. By the time I started questioning things, my sister had already woven such an intricate web of lies that untangling it felt impossible. It wasn't just about pretending to be someone else. She was emotionally manipulating my family and friends into believing that I was the one pretending to be her. She made me doubt myself, making me feel like I was crazy for questioning everything. When I confronted her, she would twist the conversation, turn it around, and make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. It was like an emotional game, and I was the one losing. And it wasn't just isolated incidents. This manipulation had been happening for years. I had grown so used to her playing this role, so accustomed to her controlling my image, that I didn't even notice the gradual shift in how people treated me. They weren't treating me anymore. They were treating the version of me she had created. My family, who I thought knew me better than anyone, had been deceived. It wasn't intentional. They weren't bad people. But they had been so blinded by the version of me my sister had shown them that they didn't realize they were supporting a lie. They had no idea that the me they saw was someone else's reflection. When the truth finally came to light, it was like a bomb exploded in the middle of our family. My parents couldn't believe it. My friends were devastated, and I was left standing there, unsure of what to do next. How could I ever rebuild these relationships when everything had been based on a lie? How could I ever trust anyone again when the people closest to me had been so easily manipulated? The emotional fallout from all of this was devastating. My sister had manipulated my family and friends into turning against me, and in the process, I was left questioning everything I had believed in. It wasn't just a betrayal from her that hurt. It was the realization that the people I trusted the most had been so easily deceived. And that left me wondering, if they could be manipulated, what about me? Was I just as easily controlled, just as easily led astray? It took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that the emotional manipulation wasn't just something that happened once. It had been happening for years. My sister had perfected the art of playing both sides, convincing everyone she was a better twin, while quietly taking over my life. And when the truth finally came out, it was hard to understand who I could trust. How could I ever rebuild my relationship with my family when I didn't even know if they had been involved in the deception from the beginning? But the biggest question that loomed in my mind was whether I would ever be able to trust myself again. If I had been so easily manipulated, so easily deceived, what did that say about my judgment? How could I move forward knowing that I had been living in a world full of deception, where the people I trusted most weren't as trustworthy as I had thought? It was a long, painful process of emotional recovery, trying to pick up the pieces of my shattered relationships and rebuild the trust that had been broken. But the hardest part was realizing that it wasn't just my sister I had to confront. It was everyone who had been complicit in the deception. Because when someone steals your identity, they don't just take your name. They take everything that comes with it. Your relationships, your trust, and even your self-worth. And that's what I was left to rebuild. My life, my trust, and my sense of self. But the road ahead was uncertain. And the emotional fallout from the lies was something I would carry with me for a long time. How could I ever fully recover when the deception ran so deep? But as time passed, I realized that recovery wasn't just about forgiving my sister or my family. It was about forgiving myself. And that's when I began to see that the journey ahead, though painful, was also one of growth. The deeper I dug into the lies, the more I uncovered about myself. And that's what kept me moving forward. It wasn't just about confronting the deception anymore. It was about learning to trust again. But that's a whole different journey, one that I wasn't sure I was ready to take. And yet, in some strange way, I knew it was the only way to truly heal. Confronting my twin sister was nothing short of an emotional roller coaster. If you've ever had to face someone who you thought you could trust with your life, only to find out they've shattered everything you believed in, then you can imagine how I felt. It was one of those moments when your heart races. Your mind is clouded with 1,000 thoughts, and all you want to do is either scream or run away. But I knew I had to face her. I had to confront her about everything. The lies, the betrayal, and the deep emotional wounds she caused me. I remember the day so vividly. It was a Sunday afternoon. The air was warm, and everything felt strangely calm. The calm before the storm, I suppose. I had been putting off confronting her for weeks, maybe even months. I didn't want to believe it was true. I didn't want to believe my twin sister, the one person I had always shared everything with, had been living my life, stealing my identity and manipulating everyone around me. But the evidence was undeniable, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't avoid the truth any longer. When I finally sat down with her, there was a surreal feeling hanging in the air. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the place where we had always shared everything from secrets to laughs. But now, it felt like a courtroom. I could feel the tension, the weight of everything I needed to say, and she could feel it too. There was a sense of unease in the way she avoided eye contact, the way her hands fidgeted nervously on the table. But she didn't speak. She knew what was coming. I didn't know where to start. I had so many questions, so many emotions to express, but it all felt like too much to handle in one moment. So I just asked her point blank, why? Why had she done this to me? Why had she pretended to be me, to steal my life and destroy everything we built together? Her face shifted, and for a moment, I saw the tiniest flicker of guilt in her eyes. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. She leaned back in her chair, and for a second, I almost thought she was going to deny everything. And she did. At first, she told me it wasn't like I thought. She said that it wasn't intentional, that she was just trying to help me. Help me? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. How could she say she was helping me when she had stolen everything from me? My identity, my life, my relationships. It was as if she was rewriting the story to make herself the hero, and I was left to play the part of the villain. She spun a web of excuses, each one more unbelievable than the last. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I just wanted to live a little. Live a little? My mind raced as I processed what she was saying. She wasn't just pretending to be me. She was actively sabotaging my life, taking everything I worked for and living it as if it were her own. But somehow, in her mind, it was all justified. The more she spoke, the more I realized just how deep her manipulation ran. She didn't just take my life. She had convinced herself that she was a better twin. In her mind, she had become the ideal version of me, the one everyone adored, the one who was always perfect. She had twisted the truth so many times that even she started to believe her own lies. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an entire shift in our dynamic. I wasn't even sure who she was anymore. Was this the sister I grew up with, or was this a stranger, hiding behind a mask of lies? The heartbreak I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. To hear my twin sister, the person I trusted the most, explain away years of deceit and manipulation with such cold detachment, it was devastating. It was as if everything we had shared, everything we had been through together, meant nothing to her. She had replaced the bond we once had with a version of herself that was only interested in gaining the approval and admiration of others. And then came the most painful part of all, the moment she admitted she had been pretending to be me. She didn't say it directly at first, but I could see it in her eyes when I called her out. There was a flicker of shame, a crack in her composure that couldn't be hidden. She had been caught, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw my twin sister as a broken person, someone who had been running from the truth for so long that she didn't even know how to face it anymore. Her admission didn't bring me any relief. In fact, it only made things worse. To hear her confess, to hear her say she had been pretending to be me, it felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the act itself that hurt. It was the realization that she had been living my life, making decisions for me, talking to my friends, taking my place in relationships, all while I had no idea. The amount of emotional manipulation involved was staggering. She had planted doubts in people's minds about me, made them question my character, all while pretending to be the better version of me. It was like a cruel game of chess, and I was the one left with nothing. As I sat there, listening to her explanations, I could feel my trust in her shattering. How could I ever trust her again? How could I trust anyone after this? My mind was overwhelmed with questions. Why did she do it? What was she trying to prove? And, more importantly, what did this mean for me moving forward? Would I ever be able to rebuild my life after this betrayal? The hardest part was hearing her excuses for her actions. She didn't take responsibility for what she had done. Instead, she blamed me. She said that I was too perfect and that I never let her have her own life. It was a classic case of deflection, where she couldn't own up to her mistakes and instead tried to make me feel guilty for her decisions. She didn't seem to care about the emotional toll it took on me, the identity crisis it caused, or the damage it did to our relationship. To her, this was all just a game, and she was the winner. But as the conversation dragged on, I knew I had to make a decision. I had to decide whether I was going to allow this betrayal to break me or if I was going to find a way to heal. But how could I heal when the person who had hurt me the most was sitting right in front of me, refusing to acknowledge the gravity of what she had done? I didn't have an answer then. All I knew was that this confrontation, this heart-wrenching moment, was just the beginning of a much longer journey. The road ahead was going to be filled with pain, confusion, and a whole lot of emotional work. But it was also going to be the path toward understanding the full extent of the betrayal, confronting the lies, and eventually learning to trust again. And I had no idea how long that would take or what it would look like, but I was determined to figure it out, because the truth had come out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The truth, once exposed, set off a chain reaction that I never could have anticipated. When the lies came to light, they didn't just shatter my relationship with my twin sister. They shook the very foundation of my entire family. Suddenly, nothing was as it had seemed. The people I thought I could trust the most, the ones I believed were on my side, were now all caught up in this web of deception. The chaos that followed was beyond anything I could have imagined. At first, I couldn't quite grasp how deep the betrayal ran. Sure, my twin sister had been living my life, pretending to be me, and that was terrible enough. But what I didn't realize was just how much of the family had been complicit in the lies. When the truth came out, the shock wasn't just about what my twin had done. It was about the way my parents and other family members reacted. There were no comforting words, no reassuring hugs, only a lot of confusion and tension. Some seemed completely blindsided, while others had been aware of bits and pieces of the deception but hadn't spoken up. It felt like everyone was playing a game, and no one had been upfront with me. One of the hardest parts of this fallout was seeing how some family members took sides. It was as if a huge divide was created, and suddenly, I found myself questioning not only my relationship with my sister, but with the entire family. It's amazing how quickly everything can unravel when trust is broken. Some people, including my parents, seemed to downplay what had happened, acting as if it wasn't a big deal. They tried to minimize the situation, saying things like, "It was just a misunderstanding," or "She didn't mean to hurt you." But how could anyone minimize what she had done? How could anyone act as if this was some small mistake, when it had been a deliberate act of emotional manipulation and identity theft? The denial was maddening, and yet I understood it in a way. After all, this wasn't just about me. It was about their daughter, too. My twin sister wasn't just a person who had betrayed me. She was also a part of their family, and they didn't know how to process the fact that she had caused so much damage. It was as if they were caught between loyalty to their daughter and the pain of seeing me so hurt. But the more they tried to excuse her actions, the more I felt isolated, like I was the one who had to carry all the weight of the truth. At the same time, some family members, those who hadn't been as close to the situation, seemed to distance themselves from both of us entirely. I remember my aunt, who had always been like a second mother to me, giving me a long, sympathetic look and saying nothing. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know where to stand. And in that moment, I realized just how much this betrayal had fractured not only my life, but the way the entire family saw me and my twin. It wasn't just a matter of confronting my sister. It was about the whole family coming to terms with the lies they had allowed to fester. The fallout also affected our extended family. Our family gatherings, once full of laughter and warmth, turned into awkward affairs where no one knew how to act. Conversations were stiff, forced. I would look around the room and see people whispering, casting glances, unsure of what to say. It was as if the entire atmosphere had changed, and the trust that had once been there was gone. The family dynamic had shifted, and it felt like a permanent fracture that could never be repaired. How do you move forward after something like this? How do you rebuild trust when the very core of it has been shattered? Even when we did have conversations about the situation, it was clear that no one really knew how to handle the truth. There were attempts to rationalize things, to make sense of why my twin sister had done what she did. But the more we talked about it, the more apparent it became that we weren't all on the same page. Some were trying to offer her excuses, to make it seem like she had been a victim too. Others were angry, rightfully so, but no one could seem to agree on what the next step should be. Was forgiveness possible? Could we ever return to the way things were? Could I ever trust her again, or anyone else for that matter? And then there were the uncomfortable conversations with my parents. They tried to convince me to forgive my twin sister, to move on from the betrayal. But how could I? Forgiveness didn't come easy when you were dealing with something so deeply personal. How could I forgive her when she had stolen my life and caused so much emotional pain? How could I ever look at her the same way again, knowing the depth of her deception? Forgiveness seemed like an impossible task, especially when there was still so much unresolved anger inside me. But I knew that the longer I held on to that anger, the more it would eat away at me. It wasn't about forgetting what she had done. It was about learning how to live with the consequences of her actions and deciding if I could ever find a way to rebuild. This is where the emotional fallout really hit. It wasn't just about my twin sister anymore. It was about my entire sense of identity. For so long, I had been defined by the person I was in relation to my family and the people around me. But now, I was forced to confront a truth I hadn't been ready for. Who was I, really? Without the role my twin sister had played in my life, who was I outside of our bond? How much of myself had I given away? Without even realizing it, the fallout left me questioning everything. I found myself looking for answers in places I hadn't expected. I began to lean on my friends more, seeking their support in ways I hadn't before. I reached out to people who knew me for who I truly was, separate from the twin dynamic. Slowly, I began to rebuild, piece by piece, but the emotional toll of the fallout was exhausting. It was a long and painful process of untangling the lies from the truth and figuring out how to navigate a future that felt uncertain and fragile. But the emotional chaos wasn't over yet. In the weeks that followed, as I tried to heal, new revelations continued to emerge. Some family members began to question my twin sister's actions more openly, while others still tried to defend her. It was clear that no one knew how to react, and the family chaos continued to unfold, pulling everyone into a vortex of confusion and pain. As if the betrayal from my twin sister wasn't enough, the deeper I dug into the truth, the more layers of deception started to surface. It wasn't just about her pretending to be me. No, it was much worse than that. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how much my entire family had been involved in this twisted web of lies. Secrets that had been hidden for years began to emerge, and each one felt like another blow to the heart. I remember the day I found out the full extent of the lies. It wasn't a single moment of revelation, but a slow and painful unraveling. It started with small details, discrepancies in things my sister had said in passing, people she had interacted with while pretending to be me. The more I paid attention, the more everything seemed to fall apart. And then came the phone call. One of my family members, someone I'd always trusted, called me and said they had information. They didn't want to get involved directly, but they couldn't stay silent any longer. That's when I found out that my sister hadn't just been pretending to be me in casual situations. She had been involved in things I never could have imagined, things that were so out of character for me. It made my head spin. She had been attending meetings, making deals, even going on trips I had no memory of. And it didn't stop there. She had started relationships, romantic ones, with people who thought they were getting to know me. People who had no idea that they were being manipulated by someone else, someone who wasn't even me. The more I dug, the more I found out about how far this deception went. And it wasn't just about my sister. As I continued to unravel the truth, I found that other family members had known, or at the very least suspected, what was going on. How had I been kept in the dark for so long? Had no one cared enough to tell me what was happening right under my nose? The realization that some of the people I had relied on the most had been complicit in hiding these secrets from me was devastating. The betrayal felt like it wasn't just coming from my twin, but from my whole family. What really hit me hard was realizing how long this had been going on. It wasn't just a few months, or even a year. My sister had been living my life for years, and everyone around me had just let it happen. How was that possible? How could the people I loved and trusted sit back and let me live a lie? I was left questioning everyone's motivations, wondering how much of their affection for me had been real and how much of it had been part of some grand deception. As the truth came out, I felt like the ground beneath me was constantly shifting. I couldn't trust my memories anymore, and I couldn't trust the people who had been around me. I remember a conversation with my mom that really stuck with me. She confessed that she had known something was off, but she never confronted my sister about it. Her reasoning? She didn't want to create conflict, didn't want to ruin the family. That explanation hit me like a punch to the gut. How could anyone, especially my own mother, prioritize peace over the truth? What kind of family dynamic had we been living in if silence was more important than honesty? But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I found out about the financial aspect of my sister's deception. She hadn't just been pretending to be me in social situations. She had used my identity to make financial decisions too. My credit had been affected, and there were bills I didn't even know existed. The emotional toll of realizing how far she'd gone, how much damage she had caused, was overwhelming. I felt violated in a way I never thought possible. And yet, as I uncovered more and more about her secret life, I couldn't help but wonder, had anyone else noticed? Was anyone else aware of the truth? Why hadn't anyone told me? I started asking people who had known both of us about her actions, and some admitted they had suspicions but never bothered to ask me. It made me feel like an outsider in my own life, like a stranger in my own story. It felt like my entire existence had been hijacked by my twin sister, and the people who were supposed to be there for me had allowed it to happen. The more I learned, the more I realized how much of my life had been shaped by this deception. Every friendship I had, every decision I had made, every step I had taken, how much of it was really me? How much of it had been influenced by my sister pretending to be me? The emotional weight of this realization was immense. It was like I had been living in a house of mirrors, seeing reflections of myself that weren't truly mine. Who was I, really? What had my identity even been if my twin had been living it all along? But perhaps the most shocking discovery of all came when I realized how long my sister had been hiding her secrets from me. Years. She had kept this up for so long, and in some ways, I couldn't help but admire her ability to pull it off. But at the same time, I felt betrayed to my very core. How had she lived with herself knowing what she was doing to me, knowing how much damage she was causing? As the web of lies unraveled, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this moment. How had we gotten here? How had we gone from being two inseparable twins to strangers who had lived parallel lives? How had our bond become so twisted, so fractured, that it could no longer withstand the truth? And as I continued to process everything, I couldn't help but wonder what this meant for the future of my family and for me. Would I ever be able to look at my twin sister the same way again? Would I ever be able to trust anyone in my family the same way? The shocking family secrets continued to come to light, and I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The emotional fallout of this betrayal was still unfolding, and the deeper I got into the truth, the more questions I had. But I had no choice but to face it all head on. There was no turning back now. The lies had been exposed, and I had to figure out how to live in this new reality. The weight of the betrayal hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just the shock of realizing that my twin sister had been living my life, but the emotional aftermath that felt like a never-ending storm. For months, it seemed like I couldn't escape the chaos. No matter how hard I tried, the memories of what happened and the broken trust one was left with kept haunting me. Every part of my life, every relationship, every decision I made felt like it had been tainted by the lies. But eventually, I knew I had to start rebuilding. I had to find a way to heal, even if it felt impossible at times. The first step was acknowledging that the pain wasn't something I could just move past in a few days or weeks. This wasn't something that would go away with time alone. It wasn't just a betrayal by my twin sister, but by the people who had known and said nothing. And while that felt like a huge weight to carry, it was also a reality I had to accept if I wanted to start recovering. The healing process wasn't going to be linear. There would be good days and bad days. Days where I felt like I was getting better, and other days where it felt like I was back at square one. I had to learn to redefine who I was after everything that had happened. I realized that for so long, I had defined myself in relation to my twin sister. We had always been a package deal, two halves of a whole, and now I felt like I was suddenly floating in the world, unsure of my place. Who was I without her? Who was I, really, without my identity being shared or taken over by someone else? These questions became a constant in my mind as I tried to make sense of the emotional fallout. At first, I thought that the best way to move forward was to put as much distance between me and everything related to the betrayal as possible. But as I tried to escape it, I realized that the pain would follow me wherever I went. So, instead of running, I started facing it head on. I started allowing myself to feel the emotions I had been avoiding: anger, sadness, confusion, and I gave myself permission to cry. I gave myself permission to be angry, even though it wasn't easy. It wasn't something I had done before, especially with my family. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who didn't rock the boat. But in this moment, I realized that I couldn't keep ignoring my feelings. I also had to work on rebuilding my relationship with my twin sister, even though it felt impossible. There was so much anger and betrayal between us that, at times, it seemed like there was no way back. But I knew that if I wanted to recover, if I wanted to heal, I couldn't hold on to the hatred forever. Forgiveness didn't come easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But I started by setting boundaries and taking small steps towards understanding why she had done what she did. Was it a cry for attention? A desperate attempt to be someone she wasn't? Part of me wanted to know why, needed to know why, but the other part of me was terrified of the answers. Through it all, I leaned on my friends. They became my lifeline in a world that had been turned upside down. When everything felt like it was crumbling, they were the ones who reminded me who I was outside of the chaos. They reminded me that I was more than the betrayal, more than the sister who had stolen my life. They helped me rediscover my passions, my goals, and the things that made me feel alive. And slowly but surely, I started to find pieces of myself again. It wasn't a quick fix, and it wasn't easy, but I was making progress. Therapy also played a big role in my emotional recovery. I'd always been the type of person to keep things to myself, to internalize my feelings. But talking to someone who wasn't emotionally involved in the situation gave me a fresh perspective. Therapy helped me process the trauma of being betrayed by the one person who was supposed to always have my back. It allowed me to sort through the mess of my emotions and make sense of it all. Through therapy, I started learning how to trust myself again, how to listen to my instincts, and how to rebuild the relationship I had with myself. And then there was the need to redefine my relationship with my family. The emotional fallout from my sister's betrayal had reverberated throughout my entire family, and trust was shattered. I had to decide what role I wanted my family to play in my life moving forward. Was forgiveness even possible with them? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew I had to make peace with the fact that the people I once trusted the most were now strangers in many ways. I had to set new boundaries and learn how to communicate my needs, even if it meant having difficult conversations. As the days went by, I started to feel more like myself again. There were still moments of doubt, still moments where I questioned everything. Did I really know my twin sister at all? Did I know anyone? But I knew that I couldn't let the past define me. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I wasn't the same person I was before the betrayal, but I was learning how to be a stronger, more resilient version of myself. In many ways, this journey of emotional recovery was the hardest part. It wasn't just about healing from the betrayal, but about reclaiming my life and my identity. I had spent so long living in the shadows of my twin sister's deception that I forgot what it felt like to live for me. But as I worked through the pain, I began to see that I could create a new life for myself, one that wasn't defined by her lies. Through it all, I learned that recovery isn't about forgetting. It's not about pretending it never happened. It's about acknowledging the pain, processing it, and learning how to move forward with it. It's about trusting yourself again, even when the world feels like it's turned upside down. And most importantly, it's about knowing that you are worthy of a life that's truly yours, without anyone else's identity being imposed on you. Looking back on everything, I can't help but wonder how I ended up in that situation. How did I allow myself to get so caught up in the lies, the manipulation, and the emotional chaos? But then I realized sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to truly learn the most important lessons in life. Betrayal by my twin sister wasn't just a lesson about her. It was a lesson about me, about how I trust, how I see myself, and how I navigate relationships. Trust, as I learned the hard way, is one of the most fragile things we have. Once it's broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. But what's even harder is learning how to trust yourself again. After all, I had trusted my twin with everything. My secrets, my dreams, my identity, and she had used that trust to live my life. It felt like the ultimate violation. And for a long time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was incapable of knowing who to trust ever again. And if I couldn't trust my own sister, who could I trust? But the lesson I learned was that trust doesn't just apply to other people. It starts with trusting yourself. I had to come to terms with the fact that I let my guard down and allowed someone to take advantage of me. That wasn't easy to accept, but in doing so, I also realized that I was in control of my own life and decisions moving forward. The trust that I needed to rebuild first wasn't in anyone else. It was in myself. I had to trust my instincts again, to listen to my gut, and to make decisions that were best for me without second-guessing everything. This realization didn't come overnight. It took time, and there were plenty of days when I doubted myself, unsure of my ability to trust again. But as I worked through the pain and started rebuilding my life, I slowly began to see that trust could be regained, just not in the same way. Trusting others was going to take time, and it would require clear boundaries and a lot of patience. But first, I had to learn how to trust myself, how to validate my feelings, how to set the right boundaries, and how to protect my peace. Another lesson I learned from this betrayal was resilience. When you're betrayed by someone close to you, someone you thought would always be there for you, it feels like your world is crashing down. For a while, I thought I would never recover from the emotional fallout. The pain felt so deep that it seemed impossible to move on. But the thing about resilience is that it's built in the moments when you think you can't go on any longer. It's about standing up, dusting yourself off, and finding the strength to take the next step, even when everything inside you is telling you to stay down. At first, resilience didn't look like much. It didn't look like bouncing back or being strong all the time. It looked like crying in the middle of the night and getting up the next morning, still broken but still willing to face another day. Resilience was about showing up even when I didn't feel like it. It was about taking small steps toward healing, even when I felt like I had no idea what that process looked like. One of the hardest things for me was not just a betrayal, but the emotional manipulation that followed. It wasn't just that my twin sister had stolen my identity. It was the way she twisted everything, the way she made me question my own reality. It felt like I was living in a fog, constantly second-guessing myself. But through this process, I learned that the only way to move forward was to take ownership of my story. I couldn't let the deception continue to define me. I had to claim my truth and stand in it, no matter how uncomfortable or painful it was. The power of resilience also came from the support I found in others. I had to lean on friends, family, and even therapists to help me rebuild my sense of self. They gave me the strength to keep going when I felt like giving up. They reminded me that I wasn't defined by the betrayal, that I was worthy of love and respect, even if I didn't always feel it. Resilience wasn't about doing it alone. It was about finding people who would walk with me, who would hold me up when I was too weak to stand on my own. And through all of this, I learned a vital lesson about moving forward. It's not about erasing the past. It's about learning to live with it. Moving forward doesn't mean pretending the betrayal didn't happen or ignoring the scars it left. It means acknowledging the pain, processing it, and deciding to not let it control your future. I realized that every experience, good or bad, shapes who we are, and while the betrayal was painful, it didn't have to be the defining moment of my life. I could move forward with it, not in spite of it. I could use it as fuel to create a better, stronger version of myself. The truth is, moving forward after such a betrayal is incredibly difficult. It feels impossible, and there will be moments where you'll feel like giving up. But trust me when I say that you have it in you to keep going. You have the strength to rebuild, to heal, and to reclaim your life. The lessons you learn in those moments of pain will shape you in ways you never expected. It's not easy, but it's worth it. As for me, I'm still working on rebuilding trust. I'm still learning to be resilient. I'm still moving forward. But I know now that the road to healing isn't straight. It's full of twists and turns, but each one takes you closer to who you're meant to be. It's been a journey. If you had told me a few years ago that I would go through all of this betrayal, emotional chaos, rebuilding trust, learning about resilience, I wouldn't have believed you. It's funny how life can throw the most unexpected curveballs when you least expect it. But now that I've come through the other side of the storm, I can say with certainty that I've learned more about myself in these past few years than I ever could have imagined. And you know what? I'm proud of that. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I didn't know if I could keep going. The emotional pain of being betrayed by my twin sister, the confusion of not understanding how she could do something like this. It all felt too much to bear. But through the heartache, through the sleepless nights and the emotional breakdowns, I found something within myself that I didn't know existed. Strength. Finding peace after everything that happened wasn't about forgetting or pretending it didn't hurt. It was about accepting that the betrayal was a part of my story, but it didn't define me. I wasn't going to let that chapter, no matter how painful, be the one that held me back from moving forward. I had to make a choice, and that choice was to heal, to forgive myself and my sister, and to find peace. Healing didn't happen overnight, and it didn't come in some neat, wrapped-up package. It came in bits and pieces, sometimes one step forward, two steps back. Sometimes it was as simple as getting out of bed when I wanted to stay curled up under the covers. Other times, it meant confronting the hard truths about myself and my relationship with my sister. But every time I took a step, no matter how small, I was moving toward peace. And that's the thing. Peace doesn't come from perfection. It doesn't come from erasing the past or pretending that everything is fine. Peace comes from accepting what has happened, learning from it, and choosing to not let it consume you. Peace comes from knowing that, no matter how painful the betrayal, I am still whole. I am still worthy of love, trust, and happiness. And so are you. If you're going through something similar, I want you to know that healing is possible. You might not feel it right now, but trust me, it's there. You are capable of finding peace after the storm, no matter how big or small that storm is. It's going to take time, but it will be worth it. You'll look back one day, and you'll realize that you survived. You became stronger because of it. So, take it from me, don't let betrayal, deception, or heartbreak define you. You get to decide your story. And if you're still in the middle of your storm, just know that there's calm on the other side. It might take a while to find it, but it's there, waiting for you now. As you reflect on your own journey, I want to leave you with this. How are you going to move forward? What are the lessons you're taking with you? And how can you begin to heal from whatever it is that's holding you back? If you feel ready to make that change, to step into your own strength and peace, I encourage you to take the next step. Healing is not a destination, it's a process. And if you're willing to commit to that process, you're on your way to something better. Remember, peace is a choice. Choose it every day. Now that you've heard my story, I want to leave you with something to think about. Life can be unpredictable, and sometimes the people we trust the most can turn out to be the ones who hurt us the most. But here's the thing, you don't have to stay stuck in the emotional fallout. You have the power to rebuild, to redefine yourself, and to trust your instincts moving forward. What if you could learn from my mistakes and avoid falling into the same traps? How would it change your relationships, your sense of self, and your ability to spot deception before it's too late? Trust me, it's all about being aware of the signs, setting strong boundaries, and knowing when to stand up for yourself. So, what's your next move? Are you going to let this betrayal define you, or will you use it as fuel to create a stronger, more resilient version of yourself? Think about it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you're ready to take control of your life and learn more about how to protect your identity, emotionally and personally, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and keep coming back for more content like this. You're not alone in this journey.